Hi, my name's Lauren Fates, and this wasn't as bad as I thought it would be.
And I'm Jamie Sanchez. Please give me my 2 hours back.
Are you ready for the beat?
I'm ready for the beat.
Listeners, you might have noticed that we dropped our first bonus episode earlier this week. The bonus ep includes summaries of all 5 volumes of the Cowboy Bebop manga. It's obviously full of spoilers, including plots and character arcs, in case you haven't gotten to read the books yourself. Today, we're taking a much higher level view of the manga, as well as Cowboy Bebop's many art books, a light novel, and we also have an awesome interview with comic artist and letterer E.K. Weaver. Before we get into that, hey, Jamie, I have had my head down just playing Pokemon Snap like all day. I haven't been looking at anything Cowboy Bebop. Do you have any news or updates for us?
Well, my friend Liz sent me a photo of a backpack in the shape of Ein. Apparently you can purchase this lovely little thing at GameStop right now, and she had to let me know about it. In particular, for fans of anime who like to collect pins and that, they'll know this as an Ita bag. If you're not familiar with Ita bags, they're named that way because Ita is like a onomatopoeia for like, ouch, it hurts. Because you spend so much money on your pins that your wallet is in pain. And the bag is to showcase all of the pins on it behind some nice plastic vinyl. So it's this really cute Ein where you could, I guess there are Cowboy Bebop pins. Lauren, you have a few, right?
I do. There are lots of pins you could put in an Ita bag. I think some people theme them after the bag itself, but some people maybe do a color theme or a genre theme or just whatever pins they have. I do have some Cowboy Bebop pins myself. I have 2 from Zen Monkey Studios. And if you go to their website, zenmonkeystudios.com, you can see several different series of Bebop pins. Mine was the lowest on the screen that you'll see. It's different characters in gold with colored glitter behind them. And this is really funny. It's very self-indulgent, but my partner has been buying them for me as we get the Bebop guests on this show. So when we talked to the Corgi Rescue, they got me an Ein pin. And then after we had Bo Billingsley on, I got a Jet pin. And my partner said, "This is your Pokemon badge for defeating the Jet Black gym." And so, not that I didn't want guests on our podcast before, but now there's prizes involved. So I really need to call Steve Bloom.
Well, now you have a bag that you can put all these pins into and show off down the street.
Do you own an Ita bag at all?
I don't. I'm actually more of a minimalist. I think if I went down the rabbit hole of like Figmas or collectibles of that nature, I would just go the exact opposite direction and lose pretty much all of my money in that rabbit hole.
I keep all of my pins on a Stardew Valley themed corkboard from Fangamer. It's shaped like a starfruit and it's already full. And so it's probably about time that I get a bag.
We got the one for you, Lauren.
Mid-30s, but I'm going to wear a doggy backpack.
When I was more into spending my money on Cowboy Bebop collectibles, that happened to be in the early 2000s when you could just walk into Borders. And at Borders, you could get all the DVDs, you could buy wall scrolls. In fact, that was pretty much our only lifeline at the time to anime goods, unless you were like at Suncoast or you had a mall with an anime specialty store in it. So during this time, anime and manga was still very widely eclectic. It was hard to find all the issues. You were often competing with other local fans who wanted the same volumes as you did because they were being released at the same time. And so we are so fortunate that things like Shonen Jump are available in the monthly subscription format it is, say, on Viz.com. Or you could just go and sign up for a Crunchyroll account and watch all the anime you want that's distributed by them. So today we'll be talking about the Cowboy Bebop manga, specifically 5 volumes that were released in 2 different sets. They're really hard to find because they've been out of print for a long time. They were originally translated and distributed by Tokyo Pop. Oh man, Lauren, I haven't revisited these since I bought them.
This was my first time reading them. I did not actually own them. I do not own them, but a friend of mine let me borrow volumes 1 through 3. And I know from talking to you that things get weird after 1 through 3. It's actually like a different art style, a different genre. And maybe I'm glad I stopped where I was forced to stop.
So we can't talk about the manga without kind of getting into how it was actually produced. The show itself was in production, and during that time in the late 90s, it was common practice to say, hey, we have this story with these characters. Here's a whole dossier on like what's going to happen, to just very generally, here are their character models. These are the basic elements of the story. Have fun, go wild. Or they would keep it a little bit closer to their chest and oversee the actual artwork and storyline that was being produced. So volumes 1 through 3 are that. They were actually written with supervision of Sunrise. The story is by Hajime Yatate, which is a pseudonym for the Sunrise staff collectively, so we can't even say there's any one particular writer on this project. But the other 2 volumes you mentioned are not. They are not that at all, Lauren. Oh my God, they are a hot mess, though.
My understanding is that crediting a collective or house is a more common practice in Japan than just this one time. I think it happens in both manga and anime. I don't know how often. I don't know if there was an era when that was most common, but it's just really interesting to see after the credits of like a Marvel TV show, they'll name everybody and it'll take 30 minutes of credits. I'm exaggerating, but just the idea that we all contributed a little bit and we all want to be kind of anonymous and share the gratitude, share the wealth. There's something sweet about that. I can't relate to it. I think if I contributed to some franchise as huge as Cowboy Bebop, I'd want everyone to know about it. But I admire it.
Yeah, in the manga world in particular, it's easier to churn out a story. It's often proof of concept that a story has legs and it's going to resonate with its intended audience, which is why a lot of manga gets adapted as anime, such as Demon Slayer and One Piece. These are huge franchises now that are making lots and lots of money. But Cowboy Bebop approached this the different way. As we know, the anime was in production for quite some time before even the stories were written. So it's likely someone on the Sunrise staff said, here's what we have to work with, and then just handed off all of that to the mangaka or manga artists, who are then charged with fleshing out the stories and sticking to the character models that they're given. Otherwise, it's kind of the Wild West, which we'll get into in a little bit.
So in addition to manga, I know that's what we're diving the deepest into today, but what other things were or were not published in terms of paper novels or paper books around Cowboy Bebop?
I know for sure there is a light novel called Wild Man Blues. I own it. I have a copy. It's sitting in my collector shelf, and I am unable to read this. It's in Japanese. I'm sure it's an easy read for folks who have beginner, intermediate Japanese language capabilities, but like I have not studied enough Japanese to understand what's going on. From what it looks like, if you thumb through it, it is probably a story that's centralized around Ein. When you have a light novel, it's a pocket-sized book. It's meant to fit in a small bag. And they usually have these little black and white illustrations scattered throughout just to add a little bit more context to the story. So Ein is actually featured in probably 3 or 4 of those illustrations out of 7. I have a friend who knows this story and knows I've owned this for well over a decade and bought a copy himself and was like, I'm not guaranteeing you anything, but I will try my best to translate this. He's since gotten busy. I don't think it's going to happen, but maybe when I'm like 50, I will actually know what this story is about.
You'll just get like a surprise birthday present.
That'd be super cool.
Well, listeners at home, if you know anybody who has translated this, we can't be the only people asking. Please let us know.
Beyond that light novel, I think there's rumors of a second light novel. I've never seen it in circulation. I haven't seen it in any kind of rare collectibles sections at conventions. But I have seen other things like music score books, which are really cool. There's a couple of those. There's also a number of illustration books that you can find that are still in circulation.
Yeah, I only have one other publication that is my pride and joy. It's called the Cowboy Bebop Characters Collection. It was published by Gakuen in 1999. It's all in Japanese, cannot read it, but it's got some pictures that, especially as a cosplayer like me, I just really appreciate. There's the episode later with Cowboy Andy, and Faye is in this huge purple ball gown, and there are character sketches of that ball gown in this book. And when I opened that up and I saw that, I had to have it. I would pay any price, and I look at it all the time.
I would say one of my prizes in my collection is the Cowboy Bebop illustration book called The Wind. This is where you see a lot of various fan art scans from. What I like about it in particular is that it's the work of Toshihiro Kawamoto, who is the character designer for the show. And there are vignettes of the characters all situated in certain scenes or settings that tell stories we don't actually get in the show. And one of them is my favorite, where Julia, Vicious, and Spike are on a subway train, and the tension is palpable between them.
I've seen that one. It's one of my favorite pictures as a huge Julia fan.
And you can get so much, you can read so much into this story just from that single image, as opposed to the whole mangas that we have sitting in front of us right now.
Ah, the manga. I guess it's probably time to talk about them, huh?
Yeah.
So, okay, questions for you. What are the differences between the front three and the back two? And which are canonical?
Volumes 1 through 3 are just known as Cowboy Bebop. They are canon. They are overseen by Sunrise staff. And I think, honestly, they're very true to the characters. The other two, they wouldn't be considered 4 and 5. They are considered Volume 1 and 2, and it's known as Cowboy Bebop Shooting Star. This is a story handed off to an artist that goes by the name of Kane Kuga, which from my research tells me is a pseudonym. And they were charged with an original retelling of the characters themselves. It was a lot to read. And nothing about this is canon at all.
So is it known that there are Cowboy Bebop stories that didn't make it into the anime and they ended up here?
The Funimation 20th anniversary art book actually does have some production notes in it. And there's a 2-page spread that is the episode list early on in the show's production. We have a few titles in here that just throw me for an entire loop. For example, an episode like The Wages of Fear - Mecha episode. Could you imagine Gundam with Mecha, like we talked about with Tachikomas in our other episode with Terry?
I would believe it. I'm glad they didn't go with it, but I think they could pull it off. I could see why they didn't, though. I could see why they didn't.
Or how about an episode titled Goodbye, Pork Pie Hat, in which it's essentially about the Titanic, a ghost ship in hyperspace. Faye reacts very sensitively to it. Her father went missing on the Titanic.
I don't know what to say other than I'll never let go, Spike. I'll never let go.
It reminds me of that X-Files episode where it's essentially ghost ship. Mulder and Scully. That's such a good one.
Yeah, that's when they smooch, which I've talked about before, how I'm a huge X-File because I'm always down for some sci-fi smooching.
Another gem here is Last Waltz, an episode about Wong, a legendary old bounty hunter. He comes out of retirement for one last job, an unsolved case from 20 years ago.
Ooh, I'm interested in how that would have gone, considering Jet is in his mid-30s, and we already treat him like he's ancient. So having a truly old man come in, I think, would have given us some interesting perspective.
But Lauren, one of the most fascinating notes here on this 2-page spread is Shoot the Pro Bowler, an former Pro Bowler turned criminal, Magic Bones. He was a bowling legend, but got kicked out for rigging his games after betting on them. And here's what's interesting. An episode where they go to a prison on Pluto. And I think we see that idea in the manga.
Yes. One of my favorite things about reading this manga, the canonical ones anyway, is that it expanded my view of the world Cowboy Bebop takes place in. You are right. We see the prison system, and we see other stuff too, like important characters, formative characters from our main crew's past. Things like scientific advancements that have been made. Where is modern medicine at this time? Different jobs you can have in the universe, like news reporter. I get the strong feeling that these were things that maybe could have been in anime episodes and were in the minds of the creators, but maybe didn't find a home in the animation.
That's what really gets me excited about Cowboy Bebop in general, is that it's a livable world in which we meet a lot of characters we can empathize with throughout the solar system, and anyone's story, such as VT's and UT's story that we talked about in previous episodes, that is also a part of this entire, essentially, multiverse of ideas.
My understanding is, by the way, that we're going to have a separate episode about the Cowboy Bebop multiverse. Yes, whatever that means.
Yeah, I would love to get into it, especially given all the things it's inspired too. But that is a long conversation, Lauren. So, Lauren, given that this is your first read-through of the Canon 3-volume set, what were your first impressions?
I am glad that I stuck with it and read all 3 of these canonical volumes. The first one didn't do a lot for me. In fact, it had a story in it that I found very problematic. The second volume focused more on new characters that really put pivotal moments into the Bebop crew's lives, and I really enjoyed these very human and character-based stories. And then the third volume ended with a high action, exciting sort of set piece that I actually really enjoyed. So I think these 3 ramp up in quality, with the exception of the one, which we will talk about. I'm glad that they're canon, and I think they're worth reading.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that the Canon 3 get better with time, because they weren't all dropped at once. In particular, Volume 1 of the Canon 3 was released in April of 1998, which was pretty close to Bebop's premiere date. Volume 2 was released in November the following year, and then Volume 3 was released in April of 2000. So they clearly had time to go back to the drawing board and be like, oh, this is how the show ended up working out. So they had the opportunities to find character backstories that impacted our main cast in meaningful ways that didn't interfere with the canon. I found that really interesting too, reading through it again, that I was just surprised at how well and seamlessly these stories blended into what we already knew about the Bebop universe.
I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on the art style. For one, I know it changes after the Canon 3, and we have some feelings about that. But the art in these first ones, it really grew on me. I think Jet is probably the weak link. The artist has a hard time, I think, drawing his chin and like manlier men. It's a little more like shoujo, in my opinion. But Spike is drawn like a total dreamboat in a lot of these frames. And Faye's hotter than she is in the anime. Like, they really take it upon themselves to show a lot of skin, put her in a lot of poses, and make some eye candy. And I turned out liking it.
I would agree with you that the character models are off a little bit throughout this one, especially Jet. That really bothered me in certain frames. But overall, they're wholly recognizable as themselves. They also were very in character for how they behaved, which is not usually common in offshoot manga. Despite that, I did find the action to be a little choppy and frustrating to follow in key areas. The high intensity scenes you would get from watching Cowboy Bebop as an anime don't really come through or pack as big of a punch as they would in the manga. In addition to that, the technical drawings also seem to be a little less detailed than I personally enjoy in my manga.
I totally agree with you about the action scenes. There were a couple of moments where there will just be a bunch of lines or a gun, but it's really difficult for some reason for this manga to convey, like, that was a gunshot, or that was a punch, or somebody just jumped, and now in 3D space, they are lower than they were before. There's this moment where some people jump basically off of a cliff onto a ship, and I had no understanding of where those different things were in space.
That's very clearly the manga artist style. They likely don't work in this format, and they probably focus more on character interactions, which was really well produced in this manga.
Something else I appreciated about the art and the creators was that there are a couple of Easter eggs in this manga. There's that weird floaty angelfish that Ed caught just kind of in a frame, and our 3 old men who are cameos in the anime over and over, they make their way into one of the later manga issues as well. And so to your point that they had time to go back to the drawing board once the anime was released, I think that was an opportunity to put in a couple of things for fans to visually catch. And I thought that was very sweet.
Yeah. And Bunch and Judy were like totally on point for what they normally do. So it was really nice to revisit the Bebop World material in this format, where I thought, like, in my brain, it was just, oh yeah, this is just the anime. And I completely forgot about the manga for so long.
Okay, but before we started recording today, you seemed pretty heated, and you've shared a couple of screenshots with me already. What about the art style in Shooting Star, Jamie?
Oh boy. As a fan of anime and manga, this story is fine. The art style is great in its own right, but my first note for Shooting Star, Lauren, is the word bad.
Bad. Shooting Star bad.
Bad. First off, this plot has nothing to do with the show. The mangaka actively makes the characters dislikable. It has a lot of Outlaw Star vibes. It's still a space opera, so if you're into those things, feel free to read it. It's competent, you can follow the plot, it is coherent, but it's not a Bebop story. To give you some background, Shooting Star was serialized in a shoujo manga magazine called Monthly Asuka Fantasy DX. They also published Record of Lodos War, Deedlit's Tale, and some spin-off stories like A Fire Emblem short and Angelique. King Kuga inserts themselves into parts of the manga, particularly at the end of each volume, just kind of giving you some ideas around how production happened. They state they were given this story by Kodakawa, the publisher of Shooting Star, because they, quote, draw macho men. And the macho men look like macho men. I could give it that. There's also some personal stories from the mangaka about how this whole plot was in crunch. And that doesn't make me feel good. I don't want to know that the creative behind this story was essentially on vacation, finishing up manga panels for volume 2 and forcing their friends to also finish with them. That was a very weird disclosure.
So when you say you want your 2 hours back, you mean the 2 hours it took reading Shooting Star?
Yes, correct. That is what I would like. Quote from Kuga Kane, "The anime is anime. This manga is different. I hope you all enjoyed it." And it does come with a disclosure at the beginning of both volumes that this is an alternate universe. These are not the Bebop characters. And in certain frames, they don't even look like themselves. Spike looks like a character from Fushigi Yugi, which is like very long spiky hair, or you see these kind of characters too in Inuyasha, where it's just a lot of texture, very boyish in certain frames, very manly in others. Like I was getting some City Hunter vibes. It just, none of this screamed Cowboy Bebop in any way.
I think under many circumstances, it's totally valid to say this is a different story that we were doing before. You know, we live in the era of the reboot. And if the Netflix team wanted to come out and say, don't expect the anime, it's not going to be that, I'd kind of get it. But when it comes to manga, when it comes to Bebop manga, I just feel like it should be Bebop because there are things that make the anime so lovable. One of the main ones being its characters. Who is asking for a version of this that is different than what everybody likes? You don't reboot something that everybody likes. Wait, I guess actually you do. I guess that's the whole problem, isn't it? I was on another podcast very recently. It was my friend JB's podcast, Bat77, and he's going through all of the Batman comics from the 70s. And he asked me why I got into comics or what some of my first comics were. Incidentally, we already mentioned X-Files this episode, but my first comics were X-Files. And I read it because I wanted to see more stories about my Mulder and my Scully. If they were to be like, this is just something different, deal with it, I would be devastated.
Lauren, hashtag not my Bebop. That's all the shooting star is. I totally get you.
I hope we like the Netflix show more than we like Shooting Star. We could start like a ranking, like which Bebop properties are our favorites, and hopefully Shooting Star stays at the bottom.
Today, listeners, we have a special treat for you. We'd like to give a warm welcome to our guest today, E.K. Weaver. E.K. is a comic artist best known for her original series, The Less Than Epic Adventures of TJ and Amal. Manga fans may have seen her expert lettering work in titles such as Cells at Work and Saint Young Men. E.K. may also be known by old school Cowboy Bebop fans by her handle Big Big Truck. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So when we decided to have a full episode dedicated to manga, it came to mind that you are both a Cowboy Bebop fan long-term and also a manga affiliate or comics artist, and it made total sense to invite you on the show. But we have to ask first, why are you a Cowboy Bebop fan?
Oh gosh, well, I really loved anime from the time I was probably about 14 or 15. And this is back in the, early mid 90s when you had to go to Blockbuster and just hope for the best. And I guess around the time Cowboy Bebop rolled around, I had gotten to this point where I was like, I really want to see something different. I'm used to this kind of storyline and that kind of storyline. And I was just kind of craving something fresh and different looking. And I remember when there was there's a big spread feature in New Type about this upcoming show. And I thought, oh, that looks really cool. I'm going to try and track that down. And, another year later, I was finally able to get a copy of, I think, episodes 1 through 3 on VHS somewhere and just completely fell in love with it. The retro style, relatable, intriguing storylines, and of course, all the film homages. I was actually a film minor in college. So that was a big treat, especially having the first episode open up with an El Mariachi homage just all the way through. And as I watched more of the show, I came to appreciate especially the character designs, the variety of settings, and how you were able to tell so much about a character by the way they dressed or the environment around them that they had made for themselves. And all of that just created some really memorable, interesting characters that I grew to love and wanted to follow through their story.
I think you hit on several reasons why so many of us are Bebop fans still to this day. We have the same passion, clearly. We're hosting a whole show about it. So our fans, though, might be newer to the show and don't really have the understanding or knowledge of the legacy behind the fandom. So as a fan in the mid-2000s, did you have a favorite fandom interaction, or did you have any fond memories of the old fan boards known as the Bebop boards?
Oh, yeah. I was really active on there, and I believe on Jazz Messengers, who I think you interviewed the webmaster for that a couple episodes back. And actually, a lot of the folks who were on the Bebop boards back in the early 2000s are now on a Discord. Yeah, now, and of course, like, everybody is like a dad or, a dad or a journalist or doing something different now. So it's been wild to reconnect, 19, 20 years later. But favorite fan interaction? Oh, gosh. Offline wise, I bought the DVDs as they came out. And one thing that we would do when a new volume had been released was we would go from Austin to visit our friends in Houston. And we would, they were big beer aficionados. So we would start a new keg and sit down and watch the entire DVD of Cowboy Bebop. And it was just Bebop and beer night. And that was kind of a ritual every time a new disc was released. And that was a blast. As for online, I think it was probably, there are a few moments, and of course a lot of this is lost to time, where, some random inside joke would just get legs and go crazy. And I remember cracking a bunch of jokes about Jet's mechanical arm having all sorts of weird attachments, and, late nights in the chat room just goofing on stuff. But a lot of that is lost to memory.
I would say that gag, I think that turned into some raunchy fan art that lives in my head rent free now. So thank you for that.
Of course it did. That entered my mind, but I wasn't going to say it out loud. So glad you took it there, Jamie. So the fandom has persevered for a long time. And as you very well know, now we're looking down the maw of a Netflix live-action edition of the show. What are your feelings about Cowboy Bebop being portrayed in this way? And do you have any predictions?
Gosh, predictions-wise, for a long time, they've been kind of, quote-unquote, threatening to make a live-action adaptation. And it's been kind of, for me, it's been like the live-action adaptation of Akira, which is, I'll believe it when I see it. And it seemed like it was really going to come together, and then COVID hit. So I'm not sure whether or not I'm going to expect that anytime soon. But honestly, my feelings about it are pretty neutral. If I hear that it's really terrible, I won't watch it. If I hear that it's surprisingly good, I probably will. My hopes for it would be that they don't try to adapt the TV series directly, but just maybe, take those same characters and just create entirely new episodes or entirely new storylines, rather than just trying to do a one-to-one adaptation of the anime, which I think would just not really bring anything new to the table. But John Cho's a great actor, so, maybe he can make it happen. Who knows?
That's really interesting that you're leaning into original stories or new perspectives on the characters, because that seems to be what you're also doing in your own fan art of them. We're really glad that your fan art site, Somewhere Down the Crazy River, is still around, and many of those pieces that people stumble upon still make their ways through, Facebook fan circles and that. So what happens to be your favorite thing about drawing Bebop fan art compared to other anime?
Honestly, I think it's because there's so much character there already to play with. And the story provides certain context that there's this one piece that I've drawn that's based on episode 24 where Faye goes back to find her old home in ruins. And it's oh, I'll paint this as a landscape. And if you've seen the show, then the emotional impact is there and you know what the context is. If you haven't, it's just, oh, okay, well, this is just a picture of some rubble at sunset. I like having that degree of backstory and context and emotion to mess with. And there's also, the element of the more you love something, the more you make fun of it. And so, yeah, I've done a lot of goofs too. Honestly, I realized I don't think I haven't drawn. I think the last time I drew Spike Spiegel was at a con as a commission in 2019. And I haven't actually updated that site since I think 2015. So my plan is to whip up a couple, at least one new piece of fan art and put it up there before this episode goes live.
As an aside, speaking of commissions, I actually have a piece of yours.
Oh my gosh.
This was a commission, I believe it was at Anime Central of 2005.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember that one.
It's been in my fan case for, some what is it, nearly 17 years now.
Oh, wow.
Right alongside all my other collectibles. So
I want to tell the listeners at home that Jamie held up the picture and she talked about it in a previous episode of this podcast. It is vicious, but like pre-problems vicious. Just a real sweet looking guy.
our audience already knows I have a love of sword boys, so this should be no surprise.
No crow of tragedy yet.
Oh, crow of tragedy. It's so nice to have a pet though.
You say that and I'm looking down at my dog looking up at me like, why do you have those things on your head?
Why do you think people are still passing around and creating Cowboy Bebop fan art this many years later? You could comment on why that's happening with your fan art or just in the ether in general.
I think the appeal of Cowboy Bebop, the aesthetics of it and the story spans pretty far compared to a lot of other anime, especially the more repetitive or more trope-based shows. And I think it appeals to a wider range beyond just the, what you'd consider just an anime fan. It appeals to people outside of fandom a lot too. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think another reason for the enduring appeal is the fact that it can either be a gateway to other things or can get people excited by making homages to those things. Like, for example, someone might read that, episode 1, like I mentioned before, is very heavily references El Mariachi. And somebody watching that could go, oh, yeah, I remember this movie. Oh, it's cool that they're referencing that. Or they might say, oh, I haven't heard of that. I'll go watch that movie. I think the fact that it can make those connections outside of itself is a big factor in why it endures.
So your personal connection clearly influences the work you're doing, both in fan art and among your original work. And you happen to be a very flexible artist, and your personal style is very distinct. Did you face any challenges in forging your own art style while also drawing fan art? And perhaps do you have any tips for fan artists who are looking to establish their own distinct style?
I remember sometime around, I'd say probably around 2002, 2003, I was doing a lot of, just anime-based work. And I was getting very frustrated because, no matter what I do, it doesn't look like anime. At some point, I think I just kind of broke and was just like, you know what? I'm not going to bother with that anymore. I'm going to draw how I want and it's going to look how it's going to look. And if it doesn't look Japanese, then whatever. And I think that was the point where my actual style started developing. As for tips to develop your own style, I genuinely don't know what kind of advice to offer on that, except keep drawing, adapt what you like, throw away what doesn't work, and just keep plowing forward. Developing your own style isn't a static point that you reach after a journey. It's an ongoing thing for the rest of your life. And if your style changes, then, oh well.
So you said earlier in this chat that the style of Cowboy Bebop was very specific, old school, iconic. What would you say are some of the key features or traits of 90s anime that really sets it apart or really shows its time period?
90s anime. Strangely enough, I think that Cowboy Bebop actually stands out from a lot of 90s anime because of its style. Visually, there are some similar elements to, I don't know if y'all have seen the anime series Golden Boy, but that was the series that the character designer was working on previously. So some of that style carried over into Cowboy Bebop. But I don't know. I think the character designs primarily I think they stand apart still from a lot of the stuff made in the same era. I do appreciate, as with a lot of older anime, watching it in high def now and seeing like any little bits of stray dust or fingerprints from the cell painting process. I believe the movie was done digitally, but the TV series was done on cells. So that's still kind of a treat to me.
The movie was done in cells, and I own 2 of them, and it's just something to hold in your hand. It has a lot of impact.
Wow, I had no idea there were cells available of that.
Yeah, the 2 I have a lot of background work on them. One looks like the opening scene where Spike walks towards the convenience store. And it struck me when I saw it because it feels something straight out of an Edward Hopper painting.
Yeah.
And I had to get it.
I think part of, not necessarily an aspect of 90s anime, but I think one of the things that made this visual style of Cowboy Bebop so iconic was that everything felt lived in. You know, the spaceships weren't all shiny and new. Everything, all of the mechanics, all of the environments looked that they'd been lived in and seen some action or seen some wear and tear, which is something just I really appreciated as an artist. You know, all the dents and such, instead of saying, oh, here's the future, it's all shiny and bright and clean. It's, yeah, humans are still messy.
So Jamie and I read the manga really recently because we had to. We know that you don't have like a deep, robust memory of those plots, but just in terms of the art style, what would you tell fans of Bebop's look and feel and animation to be ready for before they dive into these books?
Oh, the main thing I do remember, like you said, I don't really remember the stories because it's been so long since I've read it. But I do remember being struck by how much more delicate everything looked in the manga. It didn't quite look shoujo-y, but it was getting pretty close. So yeah, I was a little surprised by how the delicate line work and kind of how willowy everyone looked compared to the anime.
In general, as a comic artist and as a letterer, do you have any tips for fans of anime or newcomers to anime in terms of preparing themselves for manga? Like, is there an expectation they should have in mind?
I guess the biggest change for me is the left to right, right to left switcheroo. I do lettering on both original English comics and on translated manga. So there's always that about 10-minute period where I'm thrown off when I switch between English and Japanese printed materials. So much of American comics are influenced by manga these days that I think the visual language hurdle is probably a lot lower now.
So I remember the early days of your TJ and Amal doodles because we were, on the Bebop boards and seeing things before they were on social media, really. It appeared to me that perhaps your work on that was inspired or influenced in some way by Cowboy Bebop. Is that true? And if so, how did you draw that inspiration?
Oh, yeah, it absolutely was a huge influence. I think part of it was watching Cowboy Bebop made me realize, music has always been a huge part of my life. And then seeing this anime, I was like, oh, music can be a huge part of the story too. Obviously I wasn't making film, but music inspired so much of the storyline that I was like, I could just title these chapters after this song rather, kind of similar to how the episodes are titled after songs. And that gives the feel for it. Another thing was the character designs. When I first designed TJ, I was just like, I want to make a tall, lanky guy, kind of like Spike Spiegel. And obviously he doesn't look very much like Spike, but that kind of very, very basic framework was where he started from. And the main thing that really stuck around and influenced my artwork was just the sheer variety of builds and facial structures that Toshihiro Kawamoto put into all the characters that inhabited that universe. It was like the opposite of anime same face. And that stuck with me so much that I was like, I want to do that with my own characters too. So even if somebody only appears in 1 or 2 panels, I wanted them to look like a real person with their own life outside of that story.
That's so cool.
The Cowboy Bebop fandom has been around for a very long time, and you have been a contributing part of it for a very long time. But I'm just curious to know, over these years, how has your view of the show changed? Like, do you have a different favorite character now, or do the stories hit you in a different way now that it's a couple of decades later?
I think my perception of the characters has probably changed a little bit as I've gotten older. I think I'm a lot more sympathetic to Jet now than I was in my early 20s. And I'm like, there's no way he's 36. Nobody looks like that at 36. I think just having lived past, the age which most of the characters are in that show, kind of taking in Spike's situation, going, well, he's being kind of selfish. He doesn't really need to go off the rails like that, even though it makes for a cooler story. But it's also made me appreciate having flawed characters rather than like, oh, Spike's super cool, which is kind of the impression I had in my early 20s. Now it's like, okay, well, he's really flawed, but that's what makes him interesting. And he does make mistakes and he does do, maybe irrational things, but that's part of what makes his character compelling. And that's what makes a lot of them compelling.
We've assessed similar things on this show in Rewatch.
especially regarding poor Jet.
Oh man, he always gets, I feel like he got short shrift in that show. He's one of my favorite characters of all time, really. He's probably my favorite character in the whole show.
Just want to give him a big hug.
Yes. I actually had a dream in 2002. This is like one of my favorite dreams I ever had. Was I dreamed that Jet Black came to visit Austin, and I was like, hey, I'll show you around. And we went out and got tacos, and then we went out kayaking on Town Lake and just hung out. And it was the most chill, it was the most relaxing, chill dream I think I've ever had.
I want to be in that dream.
It was really fun.
Having met Bo Billingsley now.
Oh, he's such a sweetheart.
I would get tacos and go kayaking with Jet, and I would get tacos and go kayaking with Bo. So either way, great dream.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, EK.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. We would like to know what's next for you and what would you like to plug today?
Well, I actually have just wrapped up a lot of the manga lettering work that I'm doing, so I have time to finally focus on an original project, which is something I've been cooking up since about November. I'm working on a new original comic about a couple of guys living in Lubbock, Texas, who are storm chasers. Hopefully launching that very late this year or early next year as a webcomic. I'm not posting too much about it publicly yet, but there is some material over on my Patreon, which same username, Big Truck, same username as everywhere else. And continuing to letter multiple manga titles and multiple original English comics for multiple publishers. So please keep your eyes peeled for Saint Young Men, Cells at Work, and Jealousy by Scarlet Berryco. And that's from Viz. The other two are from Kodansha. And actually, I will be in the virtual artist alley at FujoCon, which is June 11th through 13th. And as the virtual implies, this is an online-only convention due to COVID. So if you are interested, I hope you take a look there.
Pretty sure my friend is attending. I'll have to bother her. Yeah, thanks again. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
And we hope to keep in touch.
Great. Thank you so much. It was a blast.
And I can't wait to see what you draw.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually the first time since about November or October that I have had time just to draw. So I'm very excited about that.
Thank you so much to EK Weaver for hanging out with us today. We really felt some old school fandom nostalgia. Next week, we're thrilled to announce another voice actor guest. David Thomas, voice of Gren from the dub, will be joining us in the studio. Hello, Mr. Saxophone, and goodbye, listeners. Until next time. Thank you for listening to the Bebop Beat. If you like our show, please rate us on Apple or wherever you find your podcasts. Find us on Instagram and Twitter at Bebop Beat. Our email address is bebopbeatpodcast@gmail.com.
The Bebop Beat is hosted and produced by Jamie Sanchez and Lauren Fates. Our editor and associate producer is Angela Geis. Our logo and art assets are by Kat Janda.